Very good. So I hope you enjoyed your lunch, and we will make sure not to bore you too much after such a lunch and to keep you awake as much as possible. And I think with this panel, we will manage to do so. We have dynamic enough speakers to keep your interest high. So the DACH panel, as you can imagine, covers the situation in Germany, Austria, Switzerland. One jurisdiction we will include today that is often forgotten in that context is Liechtenstein as well, because there are some interesting developments in that market. So let me just briefly introduce our panelists. We have to my very right, Hannah Kennish. She's with the Legal and Regulatory Affairs team of Playtech, a company that you definitely know, one of the largest providers, platform games and service suppliers in the world, in over 25 regulated markets, including. And Hannah's worked in many countries, I understand. She has toured the world, also for gaming. And she has covered markets such as Switzerland, Sweden, but more recently also America. Then to my immediate right, we have Jessica Meier. She's a partner with MELCHERS, a law firm that you also very well know in Germany, with a heavy focus and specialization in gaming law. She has a particular focus on regulation, licensing, and compliance, and among many other functions that she has, she's also a member of Global Gaming Women. Maybe she can tell us about this group in a moment as well. And then we have on my left Robert Todd. He's in charge of business development at Global Bet. He's very familiar with the markets both in Liechtenstein and Austria, and among other tasks, he takes care of high-profile customer accounts. So, Robert, given the really interesting recent developments in that small jurisdiction called Liechtenstein, with casinos popping up like mushrooms, I'm under the impression. Can you please describe to us the current situation, how it looks like, what developments do you observe in that market?
Yes, of course, Simon. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers and Simon for inviting me to this panel. I'm not quite a legal person. You can ask me anything about virtual sports and I'll have an answer. But in this panel, I try to do my best to answer all the questions. Our head office is also in Liechtenstein, so it's quite easy to talk about the market because we're literally on top of the first casino that was built in 2017. Liechtenstein has a very, very small population. I don't know if anyone heard about Liechtenstein, actually. Could you please raise your hand if you heard about Liechtenstein? Okay, yeah, quite some people here. Raise your hands if you think Liechtenstein has over 100,000 inhabitants. Okay. It has 38,000 inhabitants, one country, very, very tiny country. And this tiny country has 5 casinos, 2 that are operational since 2017 and 3 that are being built. Yeah, it's quite a tough number. So you can imagine how many casinos the population has. It's quite an interesting development, as no one expected this. As I mentioned before, our office is on top of one of the casinos, and the traffic there is massive. I mean, you see, especially on Friday nights, all the parkings are full, people coming in from Zurich, from St. Gallen, from Austria, from Germany, from all places around, and they gamble. They like the casinos in Liechtenstein for different reasons. Casinos also make the gambling offering very attractive, as they have the latest machines. They are very modern, you know, the classic smell in the casino. You have free food, free drinks, so it attracts a lot of players from different places.
Very good. So interesting developments. And on top of the 2+3 casinos, there are rumors of 2 more casinos. Of course, not officially confirmed, but might be as many as 7 casinos. The interesting regulatory background of this development is that some years ago, the government wanted to hand out just 1 single casino license. And the trouble was that two parties were interested in that one single license. And this struggle went on through all the court instances until finally the EFTA court decided that the procedure did not comply with EA law. So the government, being confronted with that situation, essentially made a turnaround saying, okay, we completely switched the system from one license to a liberal licensing system. Whoever meets the criteria can get a license. And of course, they were counting on two licensees, on two casinos. They didn't foresee that more people might be interested, more parties might be interested in that. And hence we have this development now. Of course, an interesting question would be, can you reverse such a development as a government, being in the EA or the EU? I don't have to sign a legal opinion tonight, but I would say at least that you could run into issues with EA law if you suddenly change the rules of the game in the middle of the game. So going to the immediate neighbor of Liechtenstein, Switzerland, my own home jurisdiction as well, and we are privileged to have Hannah with us, who has a very good overview of different markets, including Switzerland, and it's publicly known that her company Playtech has struck a deal with Swiss Casino Group. And my question would be, what's the situation there from a global leader like Playtech? What's going okay? Where do you see, on the other hand, the challenges?
Sure. Thank you, Simon. So yeah, I'm pleased to say that Playtech did enter an agreement earlier this year with Swiss Casinos. We were one of the first suppliers to enter the market. In terms of the challenges and what goes well in a regulated market, from my perspective as a compliance manager and from a supplier's perspective, I think it's good to look at the four key aspects, and one of those being, first of all, good open engagement with the regulator really helps. Second, clear and unambiguous requirements. Can you hear me? Ah, there we go. Sorry, everybody. Clear and unambiguous requirements being the second, as we've talked about a lot this morning, kind of sensible, pragmatic regulations that don't reinvent the wheel and follow other jurisdictions. And then finally, the well-established reasons is a full product offering, which is competitive for the customers, and a sensible tax rate. And to kind of give some practical examples of that, one of the greatest challenges we face as a supplier is taking multiple different interpretations of the regulations, perhaps where there are gaps or where it's not exactly clear what is expected of suppliers, and managing that from an operator's perspective, their interpretation, a local advisor's perspective, our own perspective, and marrying that all together to come up with a sensible solution that works. And finally, that leads into where good engagement with the regulator comes in. If you can have that two-way communication, it really helps. And again, on a corporate licensing perspective, we've seen that although suppliers aren't required to be licensed in Switzerland, we have faced the same level of scrutiny when it comes to establishing our good relationship. And again, that is facilitated by being able to speak directly with the regulator on those points.
So yeah, there might be different views on the tax level in Switzerland, right? Some would argue it's pretty high. It starts at 20%, which is probably sensible, but then it can go up pretty sharply depending on GGR. But you consider it as a viable rate?
Yeah, in my opinion, if we look at it in comparison to other rates, it's sensible at 20 when that starts to marginally increase, less so, but in comparison to some of the markets, like the UK is now at 21 and others, it is quite a sensible rate across the board.
Very good. So in relation to the 4 online offers that now have been licensed by the Swiss government, only 4 so far, one should say, we can observe that in these 4, we don't really have a leading B2C operator involved, but rather many B2Bs that directly cater their services to the land-based casino. Do you see additional challenges in such a constellation? If yes, which ones? It's somewhat different to other markets, right?
Yeah, in terms of kind of excluding the online offshore and having that requirement to be partnered with a land-based, I'd say it's more of a commercial challenge in terms of getting those partnerships early on. From a regulatory perspective, it's much the same. Playtech is fortunately in a unique position where it has a full kind of omni-channel offering for everything from land-based casino management systems to full online product suite, and can certainly educate those that are coming from a land-based world to online.
Wonderful. Jessica, let's move to Germany. Germany is an evergreen in regulatory discussions for many years by now. It seems like it's tough to have a breakthrough at political level in Germany. Could you please start off by giving us an overview of the most recent developments, and of course also your outlook that you would be happy to share with us?
Of course, yes. You call it an evergreen. I think it will remain an evergreen. Hopefully we'll see light at the end of the tunnel and not some dark, greyish, muddy grounds, and it will be green grass at the end. Where do we stand at the moment? In March, the prime ministers of our 16 states, a problem that, or an aspect that doesn't make it easier in Germany, agreed on a third amendment to the current legal framework, the so-called interstate treaty. And because the political discussions have not progressed fully yet to the extent that there is agreement between the states on how to regulate online gambling, specifically on the topic of online casino. There are some states that are very much in favor of regulating that, and including sort of enforcing a broad reform which would also open up opportunities for licensing for online casino. And others are very strictly opposed to exactly that idea, so it's very difficult to find a compromise. In March, that compromise was not possible yet to be reached. So sort of a part solution was agreed on, which was let's focus on sports betting for the moment. And we have a history there, but a lot of you in the room will know there was a big failed licensing process for sports betting initiated in 2012, basically never ended in the issuance of licenses to date. And actually the whole licensing term was supposed to be 7 years. This has passed without ever just a single license being issued. So in an attempt to move away from that problem, which was very much linked to a similar situation in Liechtenstein, with only one license being available. In Germany, there were 20 licenses, but we had in the first round, I think, 79 applicants there. Now we will be looking at an open system, and that amendment to the treaty that was agreed in March is supposed to enter into force in January, on the 1st of January 2020. But the legal framework is only supposed to be in force for 1.5 years as a sort of transitional arrangement, and during that time the political discussions will continue, specifically with regard to what happens after the 1st of July 2021. And again, we have these sort of two groups of states, some in favor of a broader, wider liberalization and introduction of online casino licensing, and the other side who are not in favor of that.
Jessica, to follow up on this, it seems still quite a challenging regulatory environment. Taking the industry perspective, from a operator's perspective and B2B perspective, what are sensible ways forward? Because if I understand correctly, they would have to apply for one license that is temporary and switch off the other side of the business. So not very appealing. Any thoughts on this when you look at it from the industry's perspective?
Definitely B2C in particular, because we don't have a B2B licensing system. B2C will be most challenged in that situation, and will have to find the proper strategy for their business. Now, if the business is a sports betting operator only, I think that's not many actually, or can say, look, actually my proportion of the business that is online casino is so low that I'd rather drop online casino and move forward with sports betting. That might be something to consider. But for now, this Third Amendment Treaty first needs to be ratified by the end of the year. This hasn't fully happened. We're expecting this to happen. So the law should enter into force on the 1st of January 2020. But if only one German state decides not to ratify until the end of the year, this would all become obsolete and forget everything I said. We'll go back to square one. Or we'll stick to the old interstate treaty. Now, what does an operator do that has an online casino and a sportsbook? Difficult to say, because also we need to say what kind of sportsbook, online or retail. The retail licenses are still limited in numbers, so the goal will be to get in there sooner rather than later, to have the application be on the top of the pile rather than at the bottom of the pile. An online operator might say, look, I want to monitor those political discussions which are happening in parallel and are very, very important, because if there is a sign of online casino becoming licensable as of July 2021, then of course the whole situation in terms of enforcement for online casino will relax, and it will be possible to apply for a sports betting license, monitor what's happening, keep the online casino going as well. So there's a lot of monitoring going on. It will be a challenge for operators, certainly.
So it's fair to say one needs good advice in that market as well. We've looked at online. Maybe take a brief look at retail sportsbook.
Sure, yeah. So Playtech operates a fully regulated B2C sportsbook operation in Germany. And I think from an online perspective, as Jessica said, it's been very unclear and challenging over the last 5-6 years or more. We're constantly, as a supplier, monitoring the market along with 80 plus other markets at every other time. And we'll take legal advice as and when the market changes and make an informed decision come 2021 and further onwards.
Very good. Robert, let's look at Austria, further east. Can you give us your insights from your industry perspective? What's up in the market?
Yes, of course. In Austria, we have quite a different situation. Games of chance are regulated on a federal level, and games of skill are regulated by each individual states. There are currently nine different laws that are slightly similar but also quite different. Currently, there are some new things on the market. The new law, for instance, prohibits live betting very extensively. For instance, it's not possible anymore to place a bet on who will shoot the next goal or who will get the next yellow card. The only live betting that is permitted in Austria is maybe the score after the first half or the score at the end of the game. So it's very, very restricted. And from an operator's point of view, this is a huge loss in profits because, as you well know, live betting is responsible in most jurisdictions for over 80% of the revenues. It's a very, very lucrative future. But there are different things in Austria that I would like to highlight. In Vorarlberg, for instance, which is next to Liechtenstein, you don't see slots. There is one casino in Bregenz that is state licensed. Another funny thing is that there are 15 licenses. 12 are owned by Casinos Austria, and the other 3 are somewhere in the air. Nobody knows what's going on with them. Anyway, let's get back to the point. So Casinos Austria owns this one casino in Bregenz, and you don't see any other slot games. On the other hand, if you cross the border to Liechtenstein, you have 5 casinos where you can play slots. You can literally go from one casino to the other because the country is so small. And in Austria, in Vorarlberg, for instance, there is so anyone who illegally operates slot machines, for instance, is prosecuted. It's a very serious offense. You can get a fine of up to 35,000 euros per machine, and if you operate a betting shop with slot machines illegally, if you continue to do this, you can literally go to jail. So it's very interesting that just 5 minutes drive can change a situation in such a big matter.
Are you saying especially in enforcement is practiced in different ways?
Yes, that's also true. And the two countries are very connected in a very strange way. The first casino in Liechtenstein was built by Admiral, which is part of the Novomatic group. The second one by Casinos Austria. So I believe in coincidences, but I think now that the elephant is out of the room, everybody knows what I'm talking about.
Very good. Maybe briefly we come back to Germany. I believe there's also an issue with regard to payments and payment blocking. Is that correct?
Yes, that's something again that impacts on online casino in particular. The Interstate Treaty provides for payment blocking, meaning regulatory measures being taken against the PSPs as a secondary line of enforcement if the first line of enforcement, which is the enforcement against the operator, fails or is unsuccessful. And this Interstate Treaty has been enforced since 2012, and we haven't had any real enforcement on the payment blocking side so far. That is until around about June this year, where the first so-called interdiction letter or prohibition order was issued by that authority, and that is a clear shift of how the authority approaches enforcement in the payment blocking sphere, and certainly a threat because a PSB is sort of in a different world. They don't only have clients that are from the gambling sector, so are not that dependent on the sector, so might as well say, well, we'd rather drop one or two verticals, but instead of sort of going through all the hassle and actually going through lawsuits, litigations, what an operator would do, and is actually very common to do, challenge an interdiction letter on the basis of EU law and the arguments that are there. That's something maybe a PSP won't have the same appetite for, and that could become a threat sort of going forward. That's sort of a negative outlook I'll give, but I'll give a positive one in just a moment, so don't worry. That is something certainly that needs to be monitored and will impact on if we don't see the regulatory change happening over, say, the next half year, 3/4 of a year. I think that could become a critical situation, that it's not actually regulation and enforcement by regulators that sort of dries up the online casino industry, but that it's more from this other angle, the payment side, that the true threat would then come, and just the business couldn't be done anymore because payment service providers would sort of cancel their support.
Payment is absolutely absolute key. I agree. If you don't have a sound payment process, then of course consumer trust erodes very heavily. I can add to this that actually payment blocking is an interesting phenomenon, and by way of my following example, you can tell which industries have which lobbying powers in different countries. Payment blocking was also discussed in Switzerland as a means of enforcement, but only for a couple of days. Then it was dead. And the reason was that the banking association intervened with some heavyweights, and they didn't want such a precedent created in the legal system of Switzerland. So it would have seen as one precedent and other industries could have followed on. So there's no payment blocking in Switzerland, but there is domain blocking. We have heard today from our colleague in Poland, more than 7,000 websites are listed on the blacklist in Poland. Recently in Switzerland, that blacklist came out as well, and I think it listed something like 50 to 60 websites. It goes without saying that this must be a very, very tiny margin of unlicensed websites out there. How successful that will be is to be seen. But of course, generally speaking, it's difficult to go against market powers, so to say. So if you give B2Cs, B2Bs a possibility to participate in a market, they, let's say the serious ones among them, will usually try to do that. If the environment, the regulatory environment is sound. Of course, if you impose 90% taxes, nobody will apply. But if the setting is sound, many companies will actually do that. So I want to see whether we have questions with regard to Liechtenstein, Switzerland, Austria, Germany. These are the jurisdictions we have covered, yeah. We hear you.
Okay. So in regards to Germany, I know that all the discussions, the political discussions, are being taken behind closed doors. However, do the lobbyists or the people that are trying to get all the states to a place where they can actually issue a legislation for online gambling, and I'm referring strictly to casino product right now, do you guys know by any chance what is the reason behind them not wanting? Because we all understand that there's the business is, we're talking about billions, that right now is not, you don't have, except for a country tax that the operators pay, the state doesn't get anything else. So what, if you know, of course, if there's any.
Yeah, well, we're actually very much involved in those lobbying discussions and well, assist in more sort of in the background, but the German Sports Betting Association and the German Online Casino Association in their lobbying work, which is sort of, just to provide some insight, very much sort of targeted as supporting those states who are already on board and pushing for the reforms, providing them with material that will help them bring across their arguments. And then, of course, lobbying those states who are not so open towards that idea of online casino licensing yet. An example, recently a parliamentary breakfast took place in Lower Saxony, a state which is absolutely, I would say, an anti-gambling sort of minded state, and also, by the way, the state where the Payment Blocking Authority is based, which has a central responsibility for all of Germany and all the 16 states. And sort of just by educating, and Birgitte Sand from Denmark, from the Danish Gambling Authority, was invited to speak and share her experiences and thoughts. And I think these events and similar events are very helpful, but it is, of course, small steps to then convince those states to open up a bit more. The reason and background why they're opposed to online casino is very much that the lottery, the monopolist, has a strong hold on things and a strong lobby. A lot of politicians are sort of, for lack of a better word, recycled into the state lottery companies. So they have strong political ties and therefore strong connections to the decision and policy makers. And a lot has to do with tradition and just being scared and uneducated about gambling and not interested to learn what actually can be done, for example, by technical means to ensure player protection, etc.
Thank you very much. The organizers are signaling to me that we are on time constraints, but of course I'm inviting you to simply approach Jessica, Hannah, Robert, and myself if you have any questions regarding those 4 jurisdictions while we are here. You're mostly welcome to do so. So thanks again for this panel. Thanks a lot.